Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to explore the world of complex event simulation.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, those folks out there listening are really interested in how researchers are using AI
Hmm.
to model, things like natural disasters,
Yeah.
political conflicts, and we came across this research.
Okay.
It's pretty fascinating stuff.
Okay.
It's called schema-guided, culture-aware complex event simulation with multi-agent role play.
Wow. That's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. Miriam is the AI they're working with, and it's kind of like this intelligent prophetess,
Like, whoa.
helping us prepare for future crises and maybe even prevent them.
Wow.
It's a really ambitious project, I think.
Yeah, it really is tackling a problem that's been notoriously difficult to solve.
Right.
How do you accurately model events that are influenced by so many factors,
Yeah,
especially human behavior?
right. Like, how do you even begin to predict something as chaotic as a pandemic or
Right.
like a war?
Yeah, yeah.
The research paper talks about how just looking at historical data is not enough.
It's true. It's true.
So what's the alternative?
Well, that's where simulation comes in.
Okay.
So instead of just relying on the past, we can use AI to create these models that simulate potential futures.
Okay.
So you can think of it like running a virtual experiment
Right.
to kind of see how different factors might play out.
So like with a hurricane hitting a coastal city,
Okay.
you'd need a really sophisticated simulator to capture that.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you even start with something like that?
Yeah.
Well, the researchers who built Miriam, they came up with these key criteria for what makes a good simulator. They call them desiderata.
Okay.
For example, it needs to be controllable,
Okay.
meaning that users should be able to input certain parameters.
Okay.
So you're kind of setting the stage for your simulation.
Okay.
So like if you're simulating a hurricane, you can, adjust things like the wind speed,
Mm.
the path of the storm, even like the population density of the area.
Okay. So it's not just like a generic running hurricane
Yeah.
simulation.
No, no, no.
You
Yeah.
can really tailor it.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
You can ask, like, what if we improve the building codes?
Mm-hmm.
What if we invest in early warning systems?
Right.
You can tweak the variables and see how the simulation plays out.
That's a really powerful tool
It is. It is.
for decision making,
Yeah.
preparedness. What were some of the other criteria?
Well, another really important one is that the simulator has to be knowledgeable.
Okay.
So it needs a deep understanding of the type of event that it's modeling.
So it's not just winging it.
No.
Hmm.
And Miriam uses something called event schemas to do this.
Oh, interesting. Event schemas.
Yeah, think of them as blueprints
Okay.
that represent the typical sequence of events for like a particular scenario.
Okay. So if we were simulating a disease outbreak,
Right.
the event schema would contain information about how diseases spread,
All right.
the symptoms,
Yes.
how people might react,
Yeah, all of that.
things like that.
It's basically like a structured representation of that knowledge,
Okay.
almost like a flow chart or a decision tree. And the researchers give this great example in the paper,
Okay.
a disease outbreak in Indonesia.
Okay.
And they actually visualize the event schema as a graph.
A graph. What does that look like?
Well, imagine like a network of nodes and connections.
Okay.
Each node in the graph represents a specific event,
Right.
like a person becomes infected
Okay.
or a hospital reaches capacity.
Okay.
And then the connections between the nodes represent the relationships between those events.
Okay.
So like what might cause another event
Okay.
or what typically follows another event.
So it's really capturing that whole chain of cause and effect.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And then to make sure that the simulations are grounded in reality,
Uh-huh.
Miriam actually uses a whole library of these schemas
Okay.
for 41 different newsworthy scenarios.
Whoa.
And these are all built from real-world data.
So it can simulate like a wide range of events. Okay, so we have the controllable aspect where
Wow.
users set the stage.
Yeah.
The knowledgeable aspect
Yes.
where the event schema provides like the blueprint.
It's like the foundation.
What happens next?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Miriam uses what they call a bi-level simulation approach,
Okay.
meaning that it operates on two levels, a global level
Okay.
and a character level.
Oh, wow.
And having these two levels is super important for simulating.
Okay.
You know how individual actions and choices impact like the larger course of events?
I'm very intrigued. Tell me more about these levels.
Okay, so at the global level, we have what's called the global controller.
Global controller.
Yeah, you can think of it like the conductor of an orchestra.
Okay.
It takes the schema and like the user's assumptions as input
Okay.
and uses that to kind of guide the sequence of events that unfold over time.
So, like, if we're sticking with the hurricane example, the global controller would, like, trigger events like the storm makes landfall.
Yes.
Or, like, power outages occur.
Right.
Got it. And at the character level, what's happening?
Okay, so this is where Miriam gets super innovative.
Okay.
Instead of just simulating events in a vacuum,
Oh.
it actually populates the simulation with virtual characters.
Oh, wow.
And each character is controlled by its own character controller.
So these virtual characters are kind of like the individual instruments in the orchestra,
Yes.
each playing their own part.
I love that analogy. And these characters aren't pre-programmed with fixed roles or anything. They're
Okay.
actually dynamically generated during the simulation.
Yep.
And each one has like its own unique set of attributes.
So not just a simulation of events,
Right.
but a simulation of how individuals
Yeah.
would act and react within those events.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's this agent-based approach
Yeah.
that lets Miriam really capture the human element of these complex events.
That's so cool. So how does it all work together?
Okay.
Like if the global controller is triggering these major events,
Yeah.
how do the characters respond?
Well, the characters aren't just these passive bystanders.
Right.
They have agency.
Okay.
They receive information about the events happening around them.
Okay.
And then they react accordingly based on their own, unique profiles and goals.
So like going back to the hurricane,
Okay.
if the global controller triggers an event like mandatory evacuation is ordered,
Right.
how would the characters respond?
Well, each character would evaluate that event based on like their own circumstances and priorities.
Okay.
So someone with a young family might immediately start packing and heading inland,
Yeah.
while someone who's elderly or disabled might struggle to evacuate. So Miriam really simulates all of these individual decisions and actions.
Oh my gosh, it's like each character is living their own little story
Yes.
within the larger narrative.
Exactly. It's amazing.
So how does it keep track of everything?
Right.
Because it feels like it could get chaotic
It could. It could.
with so many characters running around.
That's where those character controllers come in.
Okay.
They're constantly evaluating the situation, receiving information from the global controller,
Okay.
interacting with other characters, and making decisions about what to do next.
So there is a system.
There is. And they actually have this clever mechanism for handling the number of characters
Okay.
to make sure it doesn't get too computationally expensive.
Right.
They actually set a threshold.
Okay.
So if the simulation starts to get too crowded,
Uh-huh.
Miriam will like gracefully remove some of the less active characters.
Okay.
So the computational resources are focused where they need to be.
So it's like a stage manager,
Yeah.
keeping the cast of characters manageable.
Right.
That is so sophisticated. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that the characters have their own personalities and goals.
Yes.
Are those like pre-programmed?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And this is where Miriam is super innovative.
Okay.
So they're not pre-programmed with fixed personalities.
Okay.
They actually evolve and change
Oh, wow.
throughout the simulation
Okay.
based on the events they experience and
Yeah.
the interactions that they have.
It's like they're actually learning and adapting.
They are.
That's crazy.
It is really cool. And the researchers developed this technique they call a self-critique loop.
A self-critique loop. That sounds really interesting.
It is.
What does that involve?
So imagine the language model is playing like two roles at the same time.
Okay.
So it's the character and the
Yeah.
critic. So the model acting as the character.
Okay.
It generates a draft plan of actions
Uh-huh.
based on like its current profile and history.
Okay.
And then the model switches hats and becomes the critic and evaluates whether those actions are consistent with its personality
Oh, wow.
and like the overall narrative of the simulation.
It's like the model is having this inner dialogue with itself,
Yeah.
debating
Yeah.
what it would actually do.
Right. And this self-critique loop continues until the critic is satisfied that the actions make sense.
That's incredible. So we have these virtual characters
Yes.
with their own personalities and motivations,
Mhm.
interacting and responding to these events
Yeah.
realistically.
And culturally aware.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
We can't forget about that.
Right. So human behavior is really influenced by cultural norms and values.
Yeah, that's such a good point. So how does Miriam incorporate cultural differences into the simulation?
Okay, so they do this in a couple of ways.
Okay.
First, when those character profiles are being generated,
Yeah.
MIRIAM takes into account the cultural background of each character.
Okay.
So this ensures that like their initial values and beliefs
Okay.
align with their cultural context.
Right.
So like a character from a collectivist culture
Mm-hmm.
might prioritize the well-being of their community
Yeah.
over their own needs.
Whereas someone from an individualistic culture might prioritize their own safety first.
Right.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just that initial character setup.
Okay.
MIRIAM actually enhances the event descriptions themselves.
Okay.
So it dynamically weaves in these culturally relevant norms and behaviors.
So it's not just simulating what happens,
Right.
but it's simulating how people from different cultures
Yes.
might react to what happens.
Exactly. They use a technique called norm discovery,
Okay.
which basically involves asking the language model to identify social norms that are relevant to the situation
Oh, wow.
and the culture being simulated.
So they're teaching the AI
Yeah.
to understand not just what happens, but how people from different cultures
Right.
typically behave.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's so impressive.
It is really impressive. They give this great example in the paper.
Okay.
Let's say there's an earthquake
Okay.
and a family needs to evacuate their home
Mm-hmm.
in a culture that prioritizes individualism.
Okay. The parents might prioritize getting their children to safety
Mhm.
above all else,
Yeah.
but in a culture that really values collectivism,
Oh.
those parents might be more inclined to help their neighbors
Okay.
or even participate in community rescue efforts.
Right. So it's those subtle
It is.
but crucial differences.
Mhm.
Okay. This is mind-blowing.
I know, right?
Okay, so we've talked about how the simulation is supposed to work,
Right.
but did the researchers test it out?
They did.
Like, how well does MIRIAM actually do?
So they actually did both like an automatic and human evaluation
Oh, cool.
to assess the quality of the simulations.
Okay, and what did they find?
They found that MIRIAM, especially when it was using both the event schemas and the cultural norms,
Okay.
consistently produced really high-quality simulations.
So it works.
It does.
That's so cool.
And for the automatic evaluation, they actually used GPT-4,
Oh, wow.
which is another really powerful language model
Yeah.
to judge the simulations. And even GPT-4 was impressed.
Wow. Okay, so we know MIRIAM can produce these really detailed simulations of complex events
Yeah.
with these believable characters who act and react
Mm-hmm.
in culturally appropriate ways.
Yes.
But how could this actually be used?
Like, what are the practical applications of this? The applications are really diverse.
Okay.
So imagine like humanitarian organizations using MIRIAM to simulate disaster scenarios, to develop more effective response plans.
Okay.
Governments could use it to simulate the impacts of new policies.
Right.
Businesses could use it to understand market trends and consumer behavior.
It seems like there's no limit to the potential.
There really isn't. Like any field where you need to understand complex systems and human behavior, this could be really valuable.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive has been really amazing. We've
Yeah.
got to go through like the technical nuts and bolts of how MIRIAM works.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the bigger picture?
Right. Like, what are the implications of being able to simulate the future with this level of detail?
Yeah. That's something we need to explore more.
It is. And that's exactly what we're going to be diving into next.
Okay.
So we'll be looking at the potential benefits and risks of this technology and all the ethical considerations that we need to be mindful of.
Sounds like we have a lot more to unpack.
Yep.
Join us for part 2 of this deep dive,
Right.
where we will continue exploring this fascinating world of complex event simulation.
As we've seen, MIRIAM is this incredibly powerful tool with the potential to like help us understand and prepare for these complex events. But being able to simulate the future brings up some really important questions.
Yeah. It really does feel like we're stepping into uncharted territory here.
Yeah.
So, like, what are some of the potential pitfalls?
Okay, so one concern is just like the issue of accuracy,
Okay.
right? So while MIRIAM is designed to be as realistic as possible,
Right.
it is still just a model. It can't perfectly predict the future.
Right.
And if we rely too heavily on its simulations, it could lead to like a false sense of security or even like misinformed decisions.
That makes sense. It's kind of like using a weather forecast.
Yeah, exactly.
It can give you a good idea, but it's not always going to be perfect.
No.
So we need to use these simulations as tools
Yeah.
Not like the be-all, end-all.
Right. To inform our thinking,
Yeah.
but not to, like, dictate our actions.
Right.
Human judgment is still essential.
Definitely. So we need to be mindful of the limitations.
Yeah.
Are there other potential downsides?
Yeah. So another challenge is ensuring transparency.
Okay.
So the people using these simulations and the people who are affected by the decisions based on the simulations need to understand how they work.
Okay.
And what the limitations are.
Transparency is super important for building trust and allowing people to make informed decisions. But couldn't someone just manipulate the parameters?
Yes, that's a great point.
To get the outcome that they want?
Yeah, there's always that risk.
Yeah.
That a tool as powerful as MIRIAM could be misused, either intentionally or unintentionally.
Right, right. So how do we prevent that?
I mean, this is where education comes in.
Okay.
And just having open dialogues.
Yeah.
We need to have conversations about the benefits and the risks of this technology.
Yeah.
With ethicists, with social scientists, policymakers, and the general public.
Yeah, it sounds like we need like a new set of guidelines.
Yes, you do.
Like an ethical framework for using AI in this way.
Yes. And we need to establish those standards for data quality, model transparency, and accountability.
Right.
And it's super important to involve diverse perspectives when we're developing and using these systems.
It's not just about building the technology, but it's about building in those guardrails that ensure that it's used ethically.
Yeah. And remember, this technology is always evolving.
Yeah.
So we need to be having these conversations and adapting our approach as we learn more.
It's a process, not a one-time thing. Okay, so I want to go back to something we discussed earlier about Miriam's characters and how they're dynamically generated and how their personalities evolve.
Right.
That self-critique loop is super interesting.
It is.
Can you unpack that a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. So remember those character controllers.
Yeah.
Each representing a specific person in the simulation.
Yeah.
Well, instead of being pre-programmed with these fixed personalities, those characters are actually created as the simulation unfolds.
So Miriam's making up characters as it goes.
Yeah, it is.
Each with their own set of attributes.
Exactly. So either character will start with like a basic profile.
Okay.
A name, an age, a profession, maybe a little backstory.
Right.
But as they interact with other characters and the environment, those profiles get more detailed and nuanced.
So they are really learning and growing.
They are.
That's wild. Okay, so how does the self-critique loop play into this?
Okay, so the self-critique loop is what makes sure that the character's actions are consistent with their personality and the narrative of the simulation.
Okay.
So imagine each character has like two sides to its brain.
Okay.
One side is the character,
Great.
and the other side is the critic.
Okay.
So the character side will come up with a plan of actions based on its profile and history.
Okay.
And then the critic side comes in and is like, hold on, does this make sense?
So like an inner voice.
Yes. Exactly. Questioning their own actions, motivations, and then this back and forth between the character and the critic continues until the critic is like, okay, this makes sense.
That's so cool. So we have these characters with their own personalities, motivations, interacting with each other, responding to events realistically. And culturally appropriately.
And all of this is being like orchestrated by MIRIAM, dynamically generating these events and responses.
It's really an amazing achievement in AI.
It is.
And remember, the characters aren't just passively responding.
They're not.
They're making plans, they're pursuing goals, and even reacting emotionally to what's going on around them.
Exactly. So they're living these virtual lives.
Yeah. It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
So could we use MIRIAM to simulate the effects of climate change?
Yes.
On a particular region?
Absolutely.
Or model the spread of a disease?
Definitely. It can explore a wide range of scenarios.
Wow.
Helping us understand complex systems.
Okay.
So city planners could use MIRIAM to simulate the effects of different urban development strategies on things like traffic flow, air quality, even social interactions.
And epidemiologists could use it to model the spread of a disease.
Yes.
And test out different ways to contain it.
Exactly. Wow, the possibilities are endless.
They really are.
Yeah.
But we can't forget
that
the power of this technology also comes with responsibility.
Right.
We need to make sure that it's used ethically, transparently, and for the benefit of all.
Definitely. We need to be aware of the potential for bias, misuse, and unintended consequences.
For sure.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive.
It has.
We've gone from like the basic mechanics of how MIRIAM works to these bigger implications of simulating the future.
We've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
There's so much more to explore.
Before we wrap up for today,
okay,
I want to touch on one more thing about MIRIAM that I find really interesting.
Okay.
So we've talked about events, the characters, but how does MIRIAM take all that and turn it into a story?
That's a great question. And it really gets at how MIRIAM takes data and makes it understandable for us.
Okay.
So remember those event logs?
Yeah, like the raw data.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, MIRIAM doesn't just leave us with those. It uses its language generation skills to actually turn that data into a story.
It can tell a story.
It can. It's like a virtual screenwriter.
Wow.
Taking all the raw ingredients of the simulation, the events, the characters, their relationships, their emotions, and it weaves it all together into this engaging narrative.
So we could read a story about what happened in the simulation.
You can, and it can be like a news report, a historical account, even a fictional story.
It's taking all that complexity and making it relatable through a story.
It is, and that's what makes MIRIAM so impactful.
Yeah.
It's not just analyzing data. It's helping us understand the human story in these complex events.
This has been an amazing deep dive. We've learned how this technology can revolutionize so many things. It can, from disaster preparedness to policymaking.
And we've also talked about the ethical considerations.
Yes.
And how important it is to use this technology responsibly.
For sure.
Join us for part 3 of this deep dive.
Okay.
Where we'll continue to explore all the possibilities and the challenges of simulating the future. So we've spent the last 2 parts of this deep dive, really getting to know MIRIAM and how it works.
It's been a journey.
From, the event schemas to that self-critique loop.
Yeah.
From agent-based modeling to cultural awareness.
It's a lot.
It really seems like MIRIAM is, pushing the boundaries of AI.
It really is.
And as you said earlier, it's not just about, like, the data itself.
Yeah.
It's about turning that data into a story.
Exactly.
That's super powerful.
It is really powerful. And that idea of like AI being a storyteller is so compelling.
It really is. It's like we're watching machines evolve beyond, just processing information to, like creativity and even artistry.
It's wild.
It is. It really is blurring the lines between like what we think of as human capabilities and what machines can do.
Right. And the implications are huge.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. If AI can generate these like compelling narratives, what does that mean for like journalism, entertainment, even education?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Can you give us some like concrete examples?
Sure. So imagine a news organization is using a system like MIRIAM to like generate detailed reports on complex events. It can pull in data from all these different sources and weave it into like a coherent narrative.
It wouldn't replace journalists.
No.
But it could help them.
Exactly. It would free them up to do more in-depth analysis.
That makes sense.
Or think about the entertainment industry. I mean, we're already seeing AI being used to write scripts and storylines.
Yeah.
But as the technology gets better, AI could create entire movies or TV shows with, characters, dialogue, plot twists.
That's crazy. That makes me wonder about like the future of creativity. Like, would we consider those stories art?
It's a good question. And then who would own the rights to them?
Yeah.
It's definitely something we'll have to figure out. And then there's education.
Yeah.
Imagine students can interact with these personalized simulations that not only teach them, but tell them a story to make it more engaging.
That would be incredible.
It would.
Turning history lessons into like these interactive adventures or science concepts into these really captivating stories.
Right. The possibilities are endless.
It seems like we're at the beginning of like a big change in how we create and consume information.
It is exciting and a little bit daunting to think about where this is all going.
Yeah. Okay. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm like really blown away by the ingenuity of these researchers.
We've done some amazing work.
Who built MIRIAM.
Yeah.
But I also feel a sense of responsibility.
Me too.
This is really powerful technology.
Yeah.
It's up to all of us to make sure it's used for good.
I agree.
Thank you for going on this journey with us.
Of course.
Into the world of complex event simulation.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you've learned as much as I have.
It's been a pleasure.
About, the power of this emerging tech.
Yeah.
Remember, the future is not something that just happens to us.
Right.
It's something we all create together.
So true.
So as you go about your day,
yeah,
think about these possibilities we talked about today.
Okay.
And how you can play a role
Mm-hmm.
in shaping the world of tomorrow.
Keep asking questions, keep learning.
Yes.
And keep imagining.
Thank you for diving deep with us.
See you next time.